Hello, my friend. How are you? Welcome back. It's Dan versus everything. And today I wanted to speak about storylines in your life and how certain things will come together and certain things will fall apart. And there may be entire eras of your life which are extremely difficult. And the premise of today's video is more like a perspective check. It's a mentality thing. It's a way to approach these things. Now, when I was a lot younger, much younger, I used to feel like there were perhaps an overwhelming amount of problems, or that some of these problems appeared to be insurmountable. And in some way, the gravity of these problems appeared to me to be sufficient that they weren't worth addressing. As a young man, there were, or even as an adolescent, I should say, not even really so much as a young man, but as an adolescent or even as a child, I used to be overwhelmed by things when they became difficult, and I had a proclivity to quit, to resign when the going got tough. That was sort of in my personality as a young person. And through the years, over time, I've changed in that way. One of the ways that I've changed is when things become difficult, I'm no longer surprised. I don't moralize it. I don't think, "Oh wow, woe is me. This shouldn't be happening to me." Nothing like that. And in fairness, I never thought this shouldn't be happening to me. That was never a thought that went through my mind. Um, but I had an awareness that things were happening to me, and when I was younger, I didn't want to go through them. As I've grown, as I've aged, I've become aware that hi, honey. I've become aware that life, at some level, is a story. It has a narrative structure. Yes, it does. It does have a narrative structure, doesn't it? Sorry, I blew the smoke right at you. It has a narrative structure, and you can choose how you react to it. You can choose what your response to this narrative structure is. But there are elements of the plot that are out of your control entirely. And so what ends up being the case is that life is like a river which flows and you find yourself in it. Well, obviously you can't control which direction the river runs, not by yourself. And so your options are basically to go with the flow, or to swim with or against the current, or to do nothing. But when using the plot narrative instead of the river metaphor, the plot metaphor, there are instances, occasions which arise. And what is in your control is how you address them. And part of addressing them is what perspective you will adopt and take when you look at these plots, these storylines, these incidences which arise in your life. You can take the defeatist perspective. You can say, this is too much, this is unfair, this is not right, whatever the case may be. You can take one of those perspectives. You can take the angle that it doesn't matter. You can take the angle that it's a catastrophe. You could take the angle that it is a learning opportunity. You can take any angle you want. But one of the angles that is rarely spoken about, which I want to bring to the table today, is the narrative that any book without a traumatic moment, an event which causes a cataclysm or a problem, well, there's no climax to a story like that. There's no substance, there's nothing worth reading there. And to some extent, when you take a look at the tragedies in your life or the hard moments, it might actually help you to think of them in that way, to think of those instances and those moments, those hard spots, those rough patches as story development. And people talk about character development, how the hard times will help you develop your character and, help you become the man that you need to become, and etc. But they don't really talk about it in terms of the narrative structure. Without the rough patch, without the low, how can there be a high? Carl Jung talks about this, but he phrases it in terms of light and dark. Without the dark, you won't recognize the light. Without evil, how would you recognize that which is divine, etc.? Let's use the same logic for the narrative structure of your life, the storyline of your life. If you don't have a difficult event which challenges you, puts creases in your forehead, stresses you out, makes you lose sleep, makes you sad, makes you miserable, makes you angry, if none of these things ever happen, then you have a pretty boring story. And then how would you appreciate the beauty when it comes? Yes, you're the beauty. You're the beauty. If you don't have a downturn, then how would you know when the upturns are? You're going to think that the normal middle ground is the upturn, but it's not. It's the middle ground. I'm sorry. You're going to think that the middle ground is the downturn. So, yeah. So I think a perspective shift is actually very beneficial because when you think of tragedies, difficulties, hard times, stress, anguish, all of these kinds of things, when you think of those things as plot multipliers, the plot of your life, the story of your life, the redemptive arc that you have, or the triumphant arc, depends on how your life has gone, I suppose, is multiplied by the degree of difficulty that you overcame. The success is more impressive if you had two difficulties instead of one. And it's still more impressive if you had three difficulties instead of one, or four instead of one, and so on and so forth. And the more difficulties you have stacked on top of one another, the more incredible the story arc can be. And we learn this when we read Job, because any one of those tragedies in the book of Job would have crippled most men and caused them to forsake their faith and made them jaded and bitter. But not so with Job. He remained in his walk. And we can be the same if you simply refuse to give up. If you simply refuse to be destroyed, to be beaten, to fail, and no matter what, you do whatever has to be done to win. This is also true for your marriage and sickness or health, till death do us part. No matter what happens, we will not give up. We will not give up. With your career, with your community work, with your business, with your religion, with whatever the case may be, as long as your spirit remains unbroken, the more challenges and the more difficulties, the more incredible the triumphant arc at the end is. The more color it has, the more perspective and depth. When you look at paintings by Caravaggio, who's my favorite painter that I've ever seen, um, Caravaggio's work is extremely dark, but that makes the light so much more brilliant than his pictures, and it allows him to paint scenes where the use of light is absolutely incredible. And in my opinion, much more interesting and much more impactful than artists who add dark to a light canvas. He adds light to a dark canvas. This is the kind of painting that I adore. Well, I hope you'll take some time and think about this. Think about the ways that your difficulties and your obstacles and your moments of low experience are potentially multiplying your triumphant arc. And this is going to sound strange, but if you can try to think of them almost as a blessing, which will exalt when you do succeed, I think that will be good for you. I think it will be good for your spirit. And try to stay in the frame that eventually you will succeed, and how amazing it will be when you do. That's helpful to me when I get down. At any rate, I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Dan. This is Dan versus Everything, and I'll see you in the next one. Please like, subscribe, share, etc. Bye bye.